Hello and welcome everyone to the Lockjack GSB's Business Roundtable. This is the third episode of the Business Roundtable, and in this episode we'll be discussing the adaptation of the Caribbean to the digital age. I am your moderator for this session. My name is Fahim Mohammed, and just by way of background, I am adjunct faculty at the Arthur Lockjack Global School of Business. And in there, I work with students to understand developments in technology today, what's happening today in terms of development, emerging technologies, and so on, and as well their applications to businesses and organizations. And that's both at the strategic level and for management functions as well. And I think is worth noting that my background also includes businesses as well as participation in NGOs, so that I'm not only interested and involved in the academic discourse and theoretical models that apply to the field, but like many of you, I imagine, we feel the effects of environmental dynamics and disruption on a daily basis. So I think that's worth noting, because during the course of today, what we hope to do is get a very clear sense of where we are comparatively today within the region and as a region, and also to explore what can we do in terms of solutions to be able to enhance or improve our position and our competitiveness moving forward. To lead us in that conversation, I am joined by a diverse panel of both experienced and qualified personnel with us today, and I'm tackling this in order of beard length. We have Miss Rachel Dionarine, who is a customer success manager at ZS Medulan. She has over 13 years of client liaison and leading international teams in terms of things like design, development, maintenance of software, driving quality standards and best practices for areas for international clientele, right? Alongside her is Mr. Lorenzo Hodges, who is the CEO of Ferreira Optical, as well as adjunct faculty at the Lockjack GSB. Lorenzo has over 20 years of experience as an innovation strategist. And he has been involved in designing, developing, delivering solutions to manufacturing and service level firms. Interesting note, he assumed his role as CEO in March of 2020. So that was just before the COVID restrictions and lockdown. So we're not only delighted to have him here joining us today, but we elated that he is alive, yeah, and he's survived that process. So good to have you there, Lorenzo. And last but not least is Mr. Abdullah Mohammed. He is not only a senior internal auditor at TSTT, a local telecommunications company here in Trinidad and Tobago, but he's also director and CIO of a local education company and adjunct faculty at the Lockjack GSB. Abdullah has over 20 years of experience in things like software engineering, project management, ICT policy development, and so on. So to the panelists, a warm welcome and lovely to have you all with us today. I'm looking forward to your contributions and your guidance in that regard.
Good afternoon.
In considering the adaptation of the Caribbean to the digital age, I think it's only appropriate to start with some opening comments by each of you, so that you could give us a sense of where your head is at and what you see relative to this area. So Abdullah, I would like to start with you in the context of the adaptation of the Caribbean to the digital age. I'd invite your opening comments at this point.
All right, thank you, Buyin. What I want to do is I kind of put some stuff on the slide. Very briefly, I want to share my screen and just kind of go through, just to kind of see some ideas in this context, right? So I entitled this little opener, Emerging Technologies, Ecosystems, and the Great Caribbean Leapfrog. And what I mean by leapfrog is some of the technologies within the Caribbean context are a little bit behind, but that doesn't mean we can't, jump ahead and be globally competitive in those particular areas, right? I also was grappling with the title, so I also have the technology things that we can't be ignorant of, and by we I mean the businesses, the consumers, and the government as a whole, the state entity. So just very quickly, we know that the strategic objective of your business is really to survive, right? So, and by surviving, you have that competitive advantage. But you want to have more than a competitive advantage. This is basic strategy 101, right? You also want to thrive. You want to have that competitive advantage sustained. And at some point start growing outside of your region, growing outside of your typical markets and so on. But as Fahim mentioned, and of course, as we all know, COVID, right? So COVID happened, and it caused all of us, even the best prepared ones of us, to come right back to stage one or gear one in terms of how do we survive, right? So we all had to rethink, from big to small, had to rethink, had to transform how we do our businesses, had to rethink even our business models, and we're now forced to innovate. So for some of us, where innovation wasn't a necessity, it now is a necessity. And so we're still in this churn, this COVID churn. Some of us, in terms of businesses and so on, businesses have closed up and so, right? So how do we get back to thriving and growing, really? Well, this question has been asked and answered, so in terms of innovating businesses. And the term that we use is ambidextrous organization. So ambidextrous organizations are organizations that ambidexterity is you can use both your hands. In this case, you can use both sides of your brain, right? So you on one side, you're exploiting and exploit has a kind of negative sentiment, but it really is about utilizing and optimizing your resources and your capabilities within your organization, right? So we already do that even with COVID. Coming back to gear one, we found new and interesting ways to optimize our resources, our capabilities, and so on. But at the same time, and as we see COVID being the catalyst for this acceleration, we do have to now, in the same vein, explore, meaning exploring new technologies, new ways of doing businesses, new business models. And really, that exploration is what will take us beyond this COVID churn, beyond this COVID nightmare, into whatever that new normal is going to be. So I just want to kind of seed some of these ideas. Each one of these things is a chat by itself. But these are some of the things that I hope would to see from Caribbean businesses, from our own Trinidad and Tobago, but CARICOM businesses as well, take up, right? And if you haven't heard of any of these things, you need to be paying it a little bit more attention. Even as a business owner, some of these technologies are democratized and available to you right now. And they're available to our students in universities and so on, right? So right now we're dealing with business transformation, e-business. That is still a thing, but that's been a thing for the last 20, probably even 30 years. We've now seen the need to cloudify everything. Well, Microsoft just yesterday announced it's Windows 365, where you could literally run your desktop on their cloud, right? Blockchains are another interesting area that's actually happening, and we teach our students at the business school, not just, and for all of these technologies, not just to be consumers of the technologies, not just to buy it from international vendors and so on, but also to be suppliers, developers in these particular space. So blockchains, we see a lot of things happening with blockchain, not just cryptocurrencies, but in things like supply chain, logistics, and so on, even COVID-19 vaccination and that sort of thing, right? In addition to blockchain and cloudified everything, we have IoT, robotics, and smart everything. That is happening, that has happened, and it needs to happen more in the Caribbean. We need to have more vendors, we need to have more people making and tinkering, even down to kids in school with Raspberry Pis and so on, these kind of devices. And finally, the wave of data science that has taken the world globally, even pre-COVID, but even more so now, where data science, analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of these things, we have students and businesses practicing this more and more, and as a community, the Caribbean community that is, and we can't be left behind. Everybody from CEO down should know a little bit of programming and problem solving, right? And to support all of this is that ecosystem, that support system, so that entrepreneurship that sees the value in these new technologies and creating business models around them. We already have talent, so we already have the business schools, UE Faculty of Engineering coming out with interesting degrees and so on around this. Democratized technology. The technology is becoming more and more easily available. Of course, we need capital investment, and we need enablement from the state. We need the state to create opportunities. We need research universities and so on. So that's my thinking. I just wanted to throw this out there to see these ideas. Just for the video, this is one of the models that we teach at the business school in terms of building systems at last. So I just wanted to put that into the recording. So yeah, Fahim, back to you. Those are some of my thoughts on the topic.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. Very interesting, and especially in the context of looking at some of the technologies that are disrupting or promising to disrupt the way business is done today. So I imagine that would raise a number of questions across the running questions across the conversation. To pick up from there, we move next to Miss Rachel Dionarine. So Miss Dionarine, over to you on your opening comments.
Hi everyone, good day. Nice to be here. So I don't have slides. The perspective I want to bring to this is, so there is the technology side, but there is, we in the Caribbean are, I would say, I think we're a bit too laid back. We're more reactive rather than proactive. And the biggest thing that's facing us out there is COVID-19, right? And that pretty much disrupted the way that we work and, do things around here in the Caribbean. It really pretty much put everything to a halt. And if you sit down and ask yourself why, it's because we were not forward thinking enough to really put things in place that this would have made it a much smoother sort of transition, because there are the very small, percentage of people and businesses that they really didn't feel any of this because they could have just continued as normal. But why is the majority, why is the majority, why did they have to shut down? Why did it, put such a hold on the operations? And this is what I would like us to sit down and think about is we shouldn't have let something as big as this disrupt our lives that much. We should have been ahead of the curve instead of behind the 8 ball. So that's pretty much the conversation I would like to have with people today.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Very interesting perspective. I imagine that would have mixed reactions depending on who you speak to, and we will definitely drill down into that a little more. To bring us home in terms of the opening comments, I move across to Mr. Lorenzo Hodges. So Lorenzo, over to you.
Thank you, Fahim, and really good contribution so far from Abdullah and Rachel. Let me just put up a quick deck here just to share some key perspectives that I think I want to center around today. I believe you can see now. Okay, great.
Yep, we're seeing fine. Yep.
Okay, great. So you take this to the top. So really part of my concern, which I think is a major concern for where we are as a Caribbean, as a people inside of the digital age and how much we've adapted digital technology, really has to do with the kind of leadership that we have. And this applies at all levels in all organizations. I believe that ultimately digital transformation really is a leadership imperative. And so we know that it's critical. As Rachel said earlier, in the COVID-19 scenario with the pandemic, we saw a shift in how businesses, quote unquote, suddenly started to engage digital in a new way. What happened is a new beast arrived that disrupted everyone's affairs. Everyone had existed within certain conditions before. And it's not that we didn't know the value of digital before, but the world changed and made it a lot more apparent. And I think for everyone, there's a clear recognition that the time for digital transformation and innovation really is now. Most businesses, unfortunately, really define their current success based on the past, right? And the truth is that current success does not imply future success. In the context of COVID-19, I think many businesses have seen that. Businesses have struggled, and I know what it has been like. It has been difficult to work through because there are so many uncertainties in the environment to work out. You can't use your old forecasting methods to determine where you're going to go next. You actually have to now begin to shift the paradigm of thinking and even your strategic planning process, because you have to factor in new considerations. By default, many companies have been optimized to perform using the existing business model. And what we see with COVID-19 is the disruption is forcing everyone to rethink all of the fundamental elements of their business model to stay relevant. Digital being a key asset inside of that business model. But this is a significant concern, and it has to do with the kind of culture that exists inside of organizations. Because I believe that innovation really thrives when it is embedded into the culture of an organization, right? If it's natural for people to share ideas, if collaboration is very fluid and reflexive, it allows for ideas to go from simply a concept towards something that gets executed. Digital transformation really is more about a mindset than about technology. We have had a lot of the technologies that we've used in the current context for some time. And even some of the emerging technologies have been democratized. They are easily accessible. Building a website is easily accessible. The tools for artificial intelligence and other more complex things are becoming more accessible. However, the issue is not one of access. The issue is one of mindset. Are we thinking digital as organizations? And so we need to have a cultural shift in our organizations. Whatever values that you enforce within your organization, they are the ones that get entrenched. And of course, certain values are the ones that would limit innovation. So if you have a culture that stops new ideas flowing, where every time someone brings an idea and says, hey, why don't we? Your first response is, that will cost too much. We don't know enough about that. That's too risky. Why would we do that? Bring me a 50-page dossier explaining why this makes sense. If that's part of it, where you bring a lot of bureaucracy into the process, you'll find we will not advance apace. And there are other values that would help us to advance further to overcome the barriers to digital transformation that many organizations face today. Digital transformation and innovation, really, as I said from the start, is a leadership imperative. And so whatever leaders permit is what advances. Whatever they resist is what gets halted, is what gets shut down. Whatever you resource is what grows. So if you provide resources and put resources, and that could be dollars or it could be simply time. So there are some firms that actually say, you know what, for 1 day a week or for 4 hours a week, we allow you room to spend time in experimentation mode only. Try new things. Forget about how we work today. Explore new things. Whatever you empower is what accelerates in your company. And so if you're not empowering a move towards digital, then you will not see the benefits of it, and your organization as a whole will not make that shift. All right, so I want to stop there. Those are just some of my initial thoughts, and we could explore further along the lines of leadership and the mindset associated and so on. And of course, we'll connect in with some of the other thoughts from everyone else. Thanks.
No, excellent. Thank you very much. Quite a broad range, comprehensive range of focus there. So each one of you mentioned, and I just want to start the conversation on this, where we are today. So each one of you mentioned, in fact, the disruptive effects of COVID on businesses in general. But I wonder, Miss Rachel, you for example said, were we more forward thinking? That's something that would have been easier to synthesize and overcome. And Lorenzo, to the same effect, were the leaders driving that type of innovation and so on. But I wonder though, it seems as if businesses, whether they were technology enabled or not, would have suffered the disruptive effects of COVID on the markets, on the supply chains, on their internal operations, and so on. So, is it that we're being a bit too harsh in terms of what we expect from businesses by way of response, or is it a reasonable expectations that businesses could have overcome some of these shocks quickly? What has been your observations around that? Lorenzo, you want to start it, given that you just brought us home with that?
Sure. So I don't think, generally speaking, that there was any business that would have been fully prepared for the scale of the impact of the pandemic. This really is, as many have echoed, an unprecedented challenge that everyone has faced. And this would be both businesses and governments and all organizations, the social enterprises as well, and NGOs would have also have been affected because many of their donation streams would have been cut because their financiers would have had no resources. So in general, I don't think anyone would have been exempt. I think there are some people who were able to pivot quickly enough to take advantage of it, but it really depends on what industry you are in. If, for example, you were in certain aspects of retail, in many cases, certainly in Trinidad and in Barbados, as far as I'm aware, you would have had cases where you can't operate. There are limitations, even your staff getting to a warehouse. So even if you were online, you have limitations with ensuring all of the supply chain issues would have been taken care of. So in general, I would not say anyone was exempt. What I would say, however, is that the agility and mindset of a company is what determines how you respond in a crisis. Okay, so if you've built a culture that is agile and processes that are agile, it allows you a greater advantage. So I want to say it in levels, that it's a greater advantage that you would have, that you can more readily begin to pivot when you need to pivot. And I liken it to an athlete, and someone who is untrained, that has to deal with certain kinds of stress, is more likely to get a heart attack because they face that stress. When we live, we don't know what kind of stress we're going to face 2 years from now, 5 years from now. Someone who is in physical training all the time, their body starts adapting because they get used to dealing with certain kinds of stressors. And so their ability to then respond to the immediate challenges is better. So I'm saying, relative to everyone, the companies that are already thinking in an agile way and driving a digital mindset are the ones who would have the greater advantage compared to their peers in the same industry. And I think that's what levels the playing field a bit.
Understood. And therefore, if you were in the habit of building this thing out or working with these technologies, you would be able to leverage a lot further, is what I'm hearing as the underlying theme.
Yeah, that's correct. And what happened as well is consumer demand has shifted at the same time. So even if you had built certain capacity within your company before COVID-19, the shift in customer expectation is something that not everyone would have been ready for. So there are those uncontrollable, unknown external factors that have imposed upon the business. And so every business has to me, as a key takeaway, be thinking, how do we position ourselves to be better next time?
Excellent.
Right? How do we position ourselves to sustain business going into the future?
Excellent. Fair enough. And let me move that conversation across to Rachel. In the context of businesses being more forward thinking or embracing that innovation that Lorenzo was alluding to, it seems almost, I heard you said we were comfortable in the position that we were in. How big of an effort would you say it is for businesses that are currently in the stasis? They're very comfortable at where they're at. Is it a insurmountable or a significant effort to get businesses to start thinking in terms of forward and future and development?
The effort is the effort. You will have work involved to get to where you want to be, right? It's not insurmountable. It's very much attainable, I think. And you start very basic. Understand where you are right now, and understand where you want to go. What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be in the next year or two? So you set attainable goals for yourself and for your organization. And you will not, once you understand where you want to go and what the blue sky is, you figure out the how now in between. How do you get there? What are the tactics? And there are things that you may be able to do right now. They're very low hanging fruit, we would call them, that you can do. And then you keep at it. And if there's things that you're not sure of, how should I do this, or how could I leverage technology to do this, then you set yourself, smaller goals. Like, all right, let me figure this out. Let me see how this can help me. But it's very much attainable. That you can bite off small pieces and have you can show progress as you get to that point. So it's not that you have to turn the ocean all at once to get to that point. I'm pretty sure that you can find very small incremental changes you can make that can help you get there. It's not a huge, it may look very huge when you start, but once you have the right mindset and you start say, okay, this is what I can do, then you'll get there.
Right. It sounds almost as if look at technology as a resource to get small wins and build on that momentum, as opposed to starting very big. It sounds almost like that.
Yeah, correct. You don't go and it's unadvisable to go and just go in a black box and just do all of the oh, I want to do this. You implement everything and then you roll it out to everybody. That's not advisable right now in this day and age. You need to get everybody along. You need to get small wins, and so it helps people. It builds their confidence. Oh, great, we are seeing progress. And you have to measure your success along the way, right? So you set yourself goals, small goals. You have your metrics, very measurable metrics that you can show, and it's a confidence thing as well. You see, you need to move in.
It's a process almost.
It's a process. It's not a one-time thing, and change is the only constant in life. You're not gonna build something now or implement something now and think that I'm good with that. I don't have to revisit that. So change is inevitable.
Excellent. No, noted. To build on that, let me go to Abdullah. A critical success factor, it would seem, would be the ability of your leadership at the strategic level, your CEOs and so on, to be able to engage your technical experts, your IT professionals, your IT managers, CIO, etc. And yet, what we have seen even from the McKinsey CIO reports globally to to local sentiment is that disconnect from the executive to the technical, and it seems almost as if it's opposing sides in some cases, so it can be seen as opposing sides. How would you qualify that dynamic, Abdullah, and how has that been working from your experience in terms of that open communication to ensure both sides are working to the same outcomes?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. What we have now is a need for a new type of CEO, a CEO that understands the role that, and even more so now post-COVID, intra-COVID and post-COVID, the CEO that understands how the business impacts and how you can really leverage technology to pretty much survive. Because, I mean, let's face it, I mean, this might seem a little bit controversial, but it's based on some research from Google that we may not ever go back to how it was. So we have to look at a future where there's some sort of new normal, or this recurring nightmare, and that's the phrase that the researcher used, this recurring nightmare of COVID, right? And we have to be able to plan for that, and we need leadership, and leadership across the different functional areas to really understand how we, as Rachel and Lorenzo mentioned, how we can leverage technology to survive, and then how we can leverage technology to compete and to thrive within the environment. So we definitely need, not just CEOs, the board as well. We need the board to ask critical questions. Are we ready? Are we using the right technologies? You know, do we have plans in place? Have we learned from this experience, right? So it goes all the way up to the leadership, all the way up to the board in that regard. Yeah.
Listen, so I take your point, and permit me to be the devil's advocate and
Yes.
ask an open question to you, the panel. I am the CEO. I have tried several attempts to incorporate digital, to boost my business, to hit a new level. And what I've gotten was we've spent a lot more money, and we're asked to throw good money after bad almost, as it were. We acquire the software and the servers and the infrastructure to support a new CRM with customer loyalty, for example. And then we're told we have to upgrade the infrastructure now, and it wouldn't work on this infrastructure that we have, and so on. So to what extent is it really a question of technology for technology's sake? By the third time I get burned, I would be very disinterested in entertaining any conversation on technology investments. To me, is a black hole into which you just pour in money. You know, so that being the case, or that being a scenario, how would you respond to that? What would you say to the CEO as the key area to pay attention to come out of that comfort zone and look to the future and be forward thinking? Rachel, you wanna start that conversation?
I would ask that CEO, what are you leveraging this technology for? What is it helping you gain? Like, it seems like, you know, people have just told you, just implement the software, buy the software, and it's going to help your organization. But how? Who are, you know, what are the metrics? What is this? What goal is this helping you attain? I think if he understands that this, by doing this, it's going to help you do this, and you need to obviously have a proper implementation plan, and you need to understand how does this. You don't just throw out technology or put technology into your business just because it's a nice big name or whatever, right? It may very well blow up in your face because nobody understands how to use it. It's not customized to your particular organization, and nobody wants to use it because it's just hard. So everybody needs to understand why. What is this helping you do, and why? Why are you doing this?
And I understand that, and I hear that loud and clear. But I also acknowledge there may have been some instances where people would have come back from a conference with software in hand, and just tell the IT department to implement this. So Abdullah, back to you. In that dynamic, where you have such a disconnect, how do we address that to be more effective moving forward?
Yeah, I really, this is actually a pet peeve of mine, being an auditor. What we really need, and not just being an auditor, but looking at IT governance in particular and project governance, you really have to, what I call, manage promises. Now, the technical term is benefits management, right? But you really have to manage promises that are made in business cases. Now, that's assuming that this technology that you were burnt once, twice, three times, that was presented as some kind of proposal. If you're just going ahead and implementing stuff without some kind of research or feasibility done, even if you're a small mom and pop shop, the justification should be documented and so on. Research has shown that governance and having these kind of processes in place for ensuring proper decision making works at scale, works at small scales and large scales. So what you really need to ensure that doesn't happen, or to at least mitigate from being burned so many times, is that benefits management, that promises management. If you have a business case and that business case made certain promises, as Rachel mentioned, someone is saying, we will reduce this project, the CRM will reduce customer wait time, or will allow us to sell online or something. It must not be these promises made in business cases that are approved sometimes by the CEO and the board and so on. Shouldn't be nebulous. It should be very specific. We reduce customer wait time by 30 seconds or down to 30 seconds within a 2-year period. And so it really takes that management. It really takes that that management by the leadership and by the CEO and by the project management team as well, to ensure that after this 24-month project or this 12-month project has been implemented, that someone comes back and say, hey, you promised this 2 years ago. Did you deliver on that? Right. So it really does take that sort of governance from at all levels to ensure that you don't get burnt. And if you get burnt, well, learn and try not to get burnt again. But make sure you have that management, that governance in place.
Excellent. And let me just build on that or extend that conversation. Lorenzo, as the representative CEO on this panel, what would you look for from your IT teams or even your end user across your different departments as it relates to technology to help you drive the business forward, or for you to help them drive the business forward, depending on how you see it?
So I think everything has to be connected to the overall strategy of the company. What's your mission? What's the thing that you're trying to achieve over the next period of time? Once that is clear, meaning everyone is mission-minded and they understand the parameters of what we're trying to achieve, the next thing is to get smart people to work on generating ideas. All right. So what are the problems that we're trying to solve? What are the solutions and ideas? How do we brainstorm around those things? And so any idea that you bring really should be relevant to the direction that we're going, because any technology will not work. Because it is new doesn't mean it's good for us. Because it is affordable doesn't mean it's good for us either. So what I would want is not just for the technology partner in the company to bring that, but I would want that across the board. HR has to be thinking, how do we raise up a staff and train up and equip our teams to understand digital, so that within HR itself, they move from paper-based processes to automated processes. Likewise, within accounting, the accounting team should be thinking, how do we ensure from a cost management standpoint that we hold the company accountable and hold other teams accountable to areas where they recommend spending. And of course, and I could go through each department, but let me just jump to the technology partner specifically. I would want that the technology partner would be someone who thinks business first and understands that technology is an enabler to the business for us to get to where we are. So any conversations that the team is having, it really has to be done in a team context. There should be no one person that that is the only person. I think if anyone is the one person, that has to be the CEO or the managing director or the minister or the prime minister. Again, whoever the ultimate leader in the organization is, I think would have to be the one person, but that person has to be supported by a team that brings different perspectives so that all of the pieces harmonize to arrive at or deliver on the ultimate goal that the organization is looking for.
Right. Interesting. Interesting that you mentioned that. Forrester Research, George Colony, I believe his name is, the director of Forrester Research, mentioned the critical importance for technology knowledgeable business executives. Now, Rachel, you've been a technology partner for many companies across industries internationally and leading teams for development of that. How important is it for the lines, the different lines, your HR, your finance, your marketing, and so on, to be technology knowledgeable in order to drive that kind of innovation that I'm hearing Lorenzo allude to? And what has been your experience in that regard?
I wouldn't say so. They are actually, pretty much the people that we would deal with. So we being a consulting company, they actually do not need to know every single thing about technology and how it works. They need to have that innovative mindset that I want to make things better, or I know that my process can improve. I know that there are gaps that I can fill in my organization, be it, whatever it is. And there are people that can support you with respect to the decision, because you don't just throw technology at a problem. And as Lorenzo rightly, said, you have to understand what the problem is, and to understand that not everybody at the top knows what the problem is. They may think they know what the problem is, but they need to actually work with the people who are actually in the situation or in that particular process flow or whatever. Understand what the process, the problem, understand how things work, understand how that, what are the gaps, what are the problems. And then there are people who can support you, to suggest how you can fix your problem. So fixing your problem may not necessarily mean, a $25,000 a month subscription to a software. May not necessarily be that. It may just be a very innovative solution with very simple technology that you can solve it. So marketing people see you like these people, most companies might have like a CIO, somebody who is that innovative thinker. But I work a lot with marketing departments, and the head of the marketing department is very forward thinking. He or she may not understand what are the different types of technology out there, but he knows that there's somebody out there who can help him figure it out.
Excellent.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in quickly based on that point. That point on technology entrepreneurship. Really, we see leaders in all these different functions. I just wanted to say that that's a very good point, because a lot of times we see leadership in these different function areas saying, this company is doing that, why can't we do that here? And it's really about looking at and immersing yourself into case studies that are happening across the planet in these particular areas. And asking those questions, why can't we do that here? And what do we need to do that here? Asking those questions. It really does take leadership, not the understanding of the technology per se, which I completely agree with that, but understanding what the business, what you want out of your department, what you want out of your business, and finding someone who knows the technology to make it happen within your department, within your business and organization. So I just want to say that was an excellent point, Michelle.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you should say that, because let me make the observation. I note, especially over the last two responses, we've heard the issues of driving the processes and letting the technology fit the processes and so on. It seems almost as if to get technology to work, to be able to enjoy the benefits that we're looking at, we have to have very defined processes that could accommodate that uptake of technology. and yet we have, or we may be in a situation where if I have a fast food outlet, for example, I wouldn't have processes necessarily defined on one extreme. Or on the other extreme, if I am a government agency, I may have processes defined in legislation, and we'll have to wait for legislation to change. So it seems to be a pretty broad spectrum. And for the uptake of technology, certain conditions in that process environment have to be met. So is that something you will agree with? And really, what should we be looking at in terms of processes in order to enjoy the benefits of the technologies that are available? Lorenzo, you want to start us off on that?
So I think one of the first, one of the first processes that you have to look at is around people development, I think. So even before I get into the automation side of process, I think the people development component is essential. And I saw a note from one of our audience members speaking to that issue of training and development. And even for in an HR context, how do you go about finding the right people to add to your existing team so that you always have the right people engaged to solve any particular problem? That employee engagement component is a process that is often missing in organizations. And what you get is people check out of the system, right? They start thinking, you know what, I don't think I could add any value. So connected to the previous conversation about, I brought the tech to you, but you rejected it. Part of it is how has everyone been, what's the process for bringing more people into the conversation so that more people would understand? Most technology projects fail because of people, right? Because people don't adopt the new thing. People don't understand the new thing. So even the process for implementing and rolling out the technology is a key one. I know that may not have been the one the area of process you were thinking about, but it is a significant part of process that I think more companies have to rethink. If you get the right process for engaging people, equipping them, empowering them as part of the technology rollout process, it increases the outcomes and the way in which the organization, and that could be a government ministry or a private sector organization, how it then benefits. I could add more, but I want to leave some room for others if they want to add to the issue of process. But I think that often is an overlooked area of process management. That specific process of employee engagement is really critical.
No, excellent. Noted. You're right. It did surprise me. I wasn't thinking in terms of process for engaging employees. Abdullah, over to you. From your auditing background, how do you support that, or what have you seen companies do to be able to support that type of engagement and buy-in? And I'll just add, buy-in seems to be after the fact when you already have a plan. But even before that, when you frame in what technologies to use and what areas to digitize.
Yeah. So just I agree with Lorenzo, and Lorenzo and I go way back, so I know where he's coming from with regards to this. So you definitely do need to have that engagement. If you follow the Kaplan and Norton the balanced scorecard approach, people comes before process, right? Engagement of people, getting that buying your employees' hearts is more important than it's more difficult and more important than getting the action, putting policies in place and so on. So you really do need to have that buy-in, that vision, that sense of urgency, that inclusion, and that sense of we need to get this done as a team or as a company, right? And sometimes that's done by having that sense of urgency, creating a common enemy, for instance, saying that we need to fight this particular competitor, and so on, and you sort of marshal your forces towards that common vision, and you get that buy-in there. But you definitely need to create that vision and to marshal that vision forward, and have people around you marshalling that vision forward, So to bring everybody onto the conversation. And you will have, as you know, for all these types of initiatives, you will have your early adopters, you will have your folks coming in en masse, and you will have your late adopters and your laggers and so on. And so you should have strategies for them as well. In addition, beyond that.
Sorry to interrupt, but I do want to get Rachel's perspective around this point that you made here in the context of it seems to presuppose a highly engaged staff member or team member within the organization, which invariably you tend to find from knowledge workers, skilled workers, and so on. It seems almost to preclude the semi-skilled or unskilled workers who just there to draw pay. They didn't sign up for all this technology stuff. We don't want to have to go through more training. Just tell us what we need to do and we'll get it done. So Rachel, from your experience and really in the context of the international experience, how has that worked? Is it something that perpetuates, and how do we work around that?
I actually have a good example of this where we did some work. We were engaged to build out a service design for a particular company. And for those of you who are not sure what a service design is, it's pretty much like a very big diagram where you detail out what are the streams, the streams of work, and this particular workflow, they wanted to have the bird's eye view of your front office, your back office, all the systems, everything involved for the particular life cycle of a particular thing that they were doing, right? So it sort of involved varying departments. So the life cycle of the thing that we were doing, we were trying to map out. It involved people from the front desk straight to finance. And there are people in between, like various types of levels of admin, admin people doing certain things. And so we went over there and we did some homework, obviously. Interviewing. What we started with was interviewing employees from each department, straight from front desk straight up to finance. So we took a couple of people from each of the department and really sat down with them to understand exactly what they do on a day-to-day basis. We printed this out on a huge, it ended up being several huge pieces of paper that we had to literally stick together on a big wall. So we were looking at a huge wall with this entire workflow with each department and how each department actually touched everything because it went through several people. And we invited the people from each of those departments. We're not talking about managers, and that's what the people who actually were doing the work, the people who would talk to people at the front desk. So they came into the workshop, and so we presented to them, and they said, "Listen, did we get it right? Is this what you guys do now?" Everybody looked at their thing, and they were like, "Yes, cool, that's what we do." Okay, now help us understand what is your problem area? What is the friction point? What are the issues? So they did it. So it was a whole exercise. It was over 2 days.
I imagine that would have been a fun exercise.
It was good. And then we also solicited their feedback. Like, what do you think we can do better to improve? How can we improve this process? So we got all of their recommendations, and it pretty much aligned with what we would have suggested. But the feedback, we had a feedback session at the end of the 2 days, and it was overwhelming. It was at the end they said we have never been part of something like this. IT always threw out something to us, everyone is always scared when IT rolls something out in the organization, because we have to deal with a flood of calls and emails from irate customers. But to be part of this process, to be part of the solution, they felt grateful for that. They felt appreciated that they're not just being sidelined. Their thoughts and their feedback, it was appreciated and was built into the workflow that we had and the suggestions, and that eventually turned into the solution. So them being part of the process, being part of the solution, it gave them a sense of ownership to make this thing work. So I think that was a good success story that we had, and I think people could definitely do that in the Caribbean, bring their people along.
Right. Now, it's interesting, I was listening to that example as it unfolded, and I hardly heard any technology feature within there.
There was zero technology involved there. They may have suggested it it would have emerged out of it. Like, we have one record in this. You use one system and you use one system. It would have been really good. So yeah, I could see your data and your data, and like a unified data point around one person would have emerged. So you would have technology naturally emerging out of that solution.
Right, and just to close that area off, I do want to take a look or shift the focus a bit. But let me ask you this: a lot of the Caribbean countries are small islands with small populations, and everybody tends to be connected to everyone else. I mean, we're one person, one contact away from people we want to meet or we related or whatever. So Lorenzo, in that environment, how important really is technology to drive that internal operation? I mean, I know you were saying the technology partners and getting staff engaged and so on, but it seems almost much ado about nothing. You're creating a more complex structure that it needs to be because we have the connection to the people and we have that people focus anyway. What would you say to that?
So that's an interesting spin. The much ado about nothing. I definitely don't think it's much ado about nothing, and I know you're just poking things a bit. It is legitimate. So countries compete against countries. Okay. So in one regard, if I'm to speak at a global international level, so beyond your neighborhood and knowing people within your neighborhood, you are looking at how does your company survive in the global scheme of things? Your country survive in the global scheme of things. And so connectivity at that level and being able to use technology is part of what would enable countries to survive. Let's think about the Caribbean economy today in the context of COVID-19. Many of our economies are heavily dependent on natural resources. In particular, many of the economies were heavily dependent on tourism, which requires that people come in. Now, in our case, in many cases, with the closure of borders for different periods of time, and some have had their borders closed for longer periods of time, some have it closed to certain populations and certain countries. Tourism has taken a hit over the last period of time. So the question is, how do you as a nation then position yourself to continue to thrive over the next period of time? As long as you don't leverage technology to connect to the external world beyond your country, to access new markets, to be able to deliver services, products, and so on abroad, without that, you are stifling the growth of your economy. No economy can operate in isolation in the world as it is defined today. And so the notion of being able to leverage technology as an enabler to advance a national economy really is a critical conversation that goes beyond simply the level of connecting and relationship and communication, which I think is important. And to the extent that you can maintain your relationships through passing by your neighborhood and interacting with people and saying hi and and that works, that's fine. But when it comes to national productivity, I think more infrastructure is needed. We need to bring technology in at the national level. We need to be able to provide services and enable from our kids in school to businesses and so on, to people in underprivileged neighborhoods and villages, to be able to connect, to access new levels of knowledge, access, to be able to connect to others in other areas, to be able to access government services. Again, a lot of life could be enhanced through the use of technology. So I think it's a very meaningful thing to be able to push things. Mm-hmm. Some governments on the enablement side, quite apart from supporting on the infrastructure, in the infrastructure component of the conversation, I think part of what is needed also is some incentives where you can to encourage more organizations, and I'm saying organizations generic, not just private sector, but private and public sector organizations, to encourage them to actually use the technology to make the ease of doing business simpler, to allow people to carry about their everyday lives, that I don't have to physically go down to X location to renew some certificate or some document. If I could do some things in the convenience of my home or from the convenience of my office, those things help. And so it's a key part of the conversation where government, I think, if I'm to describe different kinds of leaders, there are individual people leaders, but then there are institutional leaders. And I think government is one of the key leadership structures in any country for how digital transformation advances.
Right. Now, so I just want to throw out one question, and Rachel and Abdullah, a response from you guys. We often hear the sentiment in the region, which was surprising to me, that we are 10 years behind. And yet, when you look around, people, I mean, if the iPhone 12 is the latest one, people have iPhones 27s, right? And we don't have 5G, but we have the capacity to connect to 5G. And then related to that, what you said in your opening remarks, Rachel, was that we tend to be a bit more laid back. So directing that to you, is it that the businesses are more laid back than they need to be? Is that fundamentally the issue? We just don't have that zeal or that enthusiasm to compete?
I think it may vary from business to business, and I think it really depends on the leadership and the type of people you have there. So, I mean, it is an interesting point. The manager or the CEO or whatever, they may have the latest technology, they may have the latest phone, but yet they don't want to open up their eyes to see that their business could, use some of that technology to, be more productive or to satisfy their customer. Because I think someone said it already, that they're just happy with the way it is a mindset, I would say. They're just happy with the way things are. And you know what? It's working. Why do I need to change it?
Okay.
It's just a mindset.
I hear you loud and clear, and I guess time will answer that question in terms of how sustainable that is. Abdullah, I want to change the focus a bit and piggyback off the last comment that Lorenzo made in terms of the role of government, but not government specifically or exclusively, in terms of the infrastructure and the capacity that we have. I'll give you an example. World Bank in their 2010 report identified one key problem as electricity and power, and consistency within that. So we tend to be, or we seem to be, subject to involuntary energy conservation, which affects, of course, everything that's plugged in. You presented on some of the newer technologies of today. To what extent can the infrastructure support that? Or to what extent would we need to see some type of capital investment necessary for us to be able to sustain that type of engagement?
That's an interesting question. So in terms of capital investment, we need to understand that the Caribbean region, the Caribbean basin, we are small economies, and we can't, from a resourcing point of view, we can't compete with the likes of India or even countries such as Ireland and UK and Silicon Valley and so on, right? So we do have, in terms of quantum, we do have we're behind on the numbers game in that regard. In terms of infra, that doesn't mean we can't have high quality solutions and so on coming out of the Caribbean region. Far from it, right? We obviously do have that, but in terms of supporting infrastructure and supporting ecosystems for these sort of technologies, we have some of the fastest broadband rates in the world, actually, right? So we're above the curve, even in some parts of the United States and Canada. And so the infrastructure is there. On the supply side, we definitely do need to have more enablement. I would say enablement in terms of some of these infrastructures and enablement on the full gamut or full range of enablement. So capital and innovation technologies and so on in universities and so. But definitely there is that need to have infrastructure and supporting ecosystem around some of these technologies, mainly because of the scale that we're operating at.
Yeah, no, interesting. Fair enough. It is almost 10 past the hour, and I do want to start bringing some questions from our audience. So for the audience members, I'd invite you to post your questions now. I have one here from Ms. Chantal Dionarine. To what extent do you, the panelists, believe from your experience that change management is given the requisite attention and is formally integrated into technology projects? Where does change management feature in technological uptake? Rachel, you want to start? I know you'll share a common surname, and on that basis alone, I'll pick you first. Yeah.
Okay, so you'll pick on me. Change management is definitely fundamental to get there. Like, you know, I think pretty much everything that we've been talking about, it's really it's around change management, understanding where you're at, understanding where you want to go, and then figuring out how you want to get there. So it is fundamental, and it starts from the top, obviously.
Excellent. Related to that, we do have a question in the context of how do we integrate. Well, let me read this off. Do we think that IT should be at the strategic level and be included in board meetings? So is it something that is necessary at the board level? And how do we approach that? So Lorenzo, you wanna take a stab at responding to that?
So I think IT, HR, finance, marketing, communications, and so on. I think you need some kind of representation of all of those functional areas at the executive level, in board or executive level. So having people with those perspectives to weigh in on matters of the future of an organization, I think would be a significant asset. IT being a significant one of them. It has been in the past for many organizations, certainly I think within the Caribbean, we have had IT managers, but not many CIOs. So it depends really on the level of the size and scale of the organization, but also it depends on how the owners of the organization perceive IT. In many cases, IT historically has been relegated to being a cost center within organizations, as has HR. Both are unfortunate realities, right? Because they've been perceived as cost centers, neither HR nor technology have been brought into the strategy level conversation for organizations as frequently as I believe they should have been. That said, the leadership of anyone who goes into IT, if you're on that track in that career, you have to make yourself relevant, because part of the challenge is the training that has been delivered to many IT professionals. Note I say many, not all, because there will be exceptions, and there are those who have done MBAs and have expanded their thinking to understand business in a wider context. Many of them, unfortunately, think limited in terms of technology and don't sufficiently provide the business perspective, which is to say, how would the technology convert into real business impact? Any IT leader that wants to sit on a board has to be able to converse at that level. And that I think, as long as we could have a new generation of IT leaders and technology leaders that understand the implications of IT on the bottom line and on the future of an organization, the constitution of boards will change.
Yeah, I hear you. It's interesting because we've been speaking to the organizational leadership on one part, and now we move into the IT leadership. So it sounds almost as if IT needs to lean more into the business, and the business needs to lean more into IT. And Abdullah, just to build on that, we have the whole issue. I'll reference Igalia's model. IT could be at the very lowest level in terms of isolated operational support, and it could go into present-day problem solving or redefining future value. In the context of things like board policies, board IT policies, and so on, how do you see those instruments or those measures helping in building that IT intent that is consistent throughout the organization, or are there other instruments that we could reference?
That's a good question. So it really is about, and just to jump off an earlier comment, the CIO needs to speak two languages. The CIO really needs to speak technology, and it needs to speak the business language. And when he or she is in that context, they need to, while they're speaking, just as any bilingual person, when you're speaking in one language, and the questions come in one language, it gets translated into the other language. And to answer your question, what the board, it really depends, as a lot of things in social sciences, it depends on the constitution of the board and so on. But the board has certain fiduciary duties to ask the right questions. And so if the constitution of the board doesn't allow for those questions to be asked, then the board themselves as a unit need to realize that that gap and get some help in terms of asking those questions in terms of are we getting the bang for our buck for our IT expenditure? Are we ready? Infrastructure ready? And some of those critical questions. And once there's that governance in place, where the leadership from the board down to the CEO and down to the leadership team has these critical risks and critical questions in place, such as are we prepared for a cybersecurity attack? Those kind of questions, right? Once those understandings are there, and how is it going to impact our business, you will find the answers floating up from the relevant folks within the organization. So an organization, a large enough organization, has that kind of specialty. And if you don't have that specialty within the organization, then you need to ask those questions from consultants or in a small company. Find the answers on YouTube, right? So yeah, so it's really about asking the right questions and knowing what you don't know, and finding all the questions there.
Interesting enough, and I just want to piggyback off of there. There was a question with respect to how would you describe the needs of the digitally empowered customer, and I want to add that into build on what Abdullah was saying. To what extent, Lorenzo, to what extent would we as businesses need to not just consider what technology can do, but what the customer demands are? Is that something that is critically necessary, urgent? Is it something more of a nice idea? How does that feature in the context of an organization's posturing or positioning for the future?
All organizations really exist to serve their customers. In the case of the government, the customer base is the citizens of the country. In the case of a private sector organization, your customers will be those who buy from your goods and services. In the case of an NGO, for example, it would be their benefactors, the people who depend on them to provide whatever solutions that they form for. When you see it that way, you realize where the focus of the organization has to be, right? You exist, that's part of your purpose, to serve that group of people. And so the more you are empathetic towards that audience, the more you understand them, what their needs are, is the better you can then tailor your strategy to serve their needs. As it pertains to I think you said is the digitally empowered customer is the question. The digitally empowered customer is someone who has interesting expectations in today's world. They expect speed, convenience, and ease. Right? If you can't deliver on those, they will find someone else who can, because they understand that there is more power available at their fingertips than in any other generation before today, right? So someone who is digitally empowered understands that this device, or you can't see it, sorry. I'm holding my phone, which I think is, let me put it closer here. This device is their access to the world. The laptop I'm using is their access to the world. I can vote in some places, whether through formal actual national elections, or I could vote and petition governments and systems and have thousands of people agree by clicking a button. I could buy what I want and have it delivered to my home within either hours or a day or two, depending on the place in the world that you are. And so at people's fingertips is power today. And so every organization has to be thinking, how do I then deliver ease, speed, convenience to that customer group?
Now, it's interesting, Bevel Wooding in 2017 in the business Trinidad and Tobago said a new class of entrepreneurs is also emerging, fully intent on harnessing the power of technology to build homegrown solutions with global appeal, right? In the context of emerging technologies, and Abdullah, I'll direct this question to you. And this is building on the question by Ms. Listra Long. In the context of emerging technologies and the supporting ecosystems, how could we, as a business today, especially a small business, how easy is it to engage some of these technologies that are available? Is it a necessarily expensive or onerous exercise? What advice could you give?
Well, Bevel always has the right ideas. I think Lorenzo will agree. Telios, as far as I can remember, Telios was one of the first companies who had a hackathon in Trinidad. And correct me if I'm wrong, Lorenzo, right?
That's right.
Yeah, right. So that's the kind of thinking that we need to have in this regard. The increasingly so. These technologies are becoming more and more democratized, and by democratized I mean available to everyone. Right? We can pop open our phones and find out where we are on the planet. We can go around on Google Maps. We can integrate Google Maps into our websites in less than a minute, right? Whereas 10 years ago it would have taken quite some time. So these technologies that I mentioned at the start, things like blockchain, we have Hyperledger, things of free open source mature solutions that are being used in business. And this is where we try to communicate with our students as well, that the technology is literally there. You just need to play. You need to play around with the technology and use the technology and create businesses around the technology, create business opportunities around it. And I think Telios and Periri right now has something similar, has the right idea, where you have these engagements, where you engage even the youth to come in and show what they know. Yeah, so the technology is right there, literally waiting for. That's why I said leapfrog. Literally waiting for us to just grab it up and run with it. in a lot of places.
Let me be a bit more direct in my question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
In this COVID context, I have no revenue coming in because I haven't been operating. So I have the time available. I've been using whatever time available to build my competencies and so on. Is this an area that I could engage, having no disposable income, no R&D budget, no kind of resources to throw at it? How easy is that proposition?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Sorry, that's me?
Yeah, yeah.
I'll give you an example of a small business owner I know. The owner is a lady who's a friend of my wife. No technology background whatsoever, right? Absolutely not. But a very shrewd business owner, realizing that she needs to put her business online, and realizing that other businesses at her size and her scale are doing it, right? As she put it, if I recall, if Challenge is doing it, why can't I? She went on YouTube, literally went on YouTube, figure out how to. I mean, she had some help, but went on YouTube, figure out how to use WooCommerce and WordPress, and started building her store online. Now, there's a point there where she needs some help. All the information is there, right? So, and YouTube is not as it was 10 years ago, and these are these, and I'm pointing out YouTube, but there are other things like Coursera and so on that are there, that where the knowledge now is democratized, not just the technology. The knowledge to use technology. So, I would say to any small business owner that necessity is the mother of invention, necessity is the mother of innovation as well, right? And the knowledge is out there, and just grab it up, and run with it. What you get at the business school is the connections and the strategy behind it. But if you particularly thirsty enough, you can make it happen. Definitely make it happen. I would encourage anyone to try.
Excellent. No, I appreciate that. Rachel, just to build on that, in the context of the ecosystem, Abdullah mentioned the individual in question needed some support at different points. How mature is the supporting environment? Is there anything in our country or in the countries in the region? Is there anything that the ecosystem needs or has to have happen for that support to be more widely available?
I think yes, I think they do. Particularly, I guess, if we're talking about this industry, so in a global context, you would have consulting companies that know this thing and know how to marry technology and business and how to figure out that. But in terms of like the Caribbean and small businesses, I would say the government needs to step in and be able to provide that kind of support to these small businesses. But there's, as Abdullah said, there's only so that you can do so much by self-help and like looking for things and trying to figure it out on your own. But bridging the gap in the areas that they don't know about and like maybe teaching them how to use technology to get their business booming. I do think the government has a big role to play in that, and they probably do. Like I know there's like ADB and stuff like that. I've never explored those particular options, but if the government has those particular capabilities, they should advertise it more. They should be, should proactively go to these businesses. How can I help you? Because these businesses are what helps our economy grow, right?
Right. And an open question, really. This came from Adrian Thomas. We had the government's participation and support is one side of it, and especially in the context of the education sector. Usually, we see a lot of importance directed to the education sector. Is there anything that critically needs to happen now for the education sector for the uptake of technology to improve? As opposed to, I heard Abdullah mention just a little while ago that you could go on YouTube and access the videos. So where does the education sector fit versus the trends in education that we witnessing right now? Lorenzo, you wanna take a first stab at that?
Sure. Education really, by itself, is a huge enabler for societies, for business, for everything that we have to do. I think we have some evolving to do, and in that regard, especially in the current context. Many Caribbean nations, their schooling model would have had to rapidly change over the last year in order to protect lives and health of students. But if I could speak to education broad beyond just the younger kids to across the board, so education really is about general learning. And we, in no other time in history, have we had as much access as we have now to knowledge. So education, Abdullah mentioned YouTube. There are people who learn critical skills on YouTube for free, right? And it could be as frivolous as learning to cook shrimp, as I did a week ago, or it could be as complex as learning how to write software. You have new MOOCs where you can join programs like edX, Coursera. I think as Abdullah mentioned, Coursera, and other online institutions, and learn for free. On LinkedIn, there's LinkedIn Learning. So you want to learn specific skills. You want to learn digital marketing. You want to learn coding. You want to learn different things. Again, there are new modalities that are available for accessing information, both formal and structured, like those online universities where you get digital certificates, as well as your more free, open, unstructured, that is community driven, like YouTube and so on. And there are lots in between. And so what has to happen is our education system has to now evolve to leverage the access that is available, or the content and the curriculum that is available. We have to start adapting our curriculum to leverage digital in a particular way, but also we have to adapt it to make our students and the learners more relevant for the future. So the kinds of stuff that you have to learn. I learned coding, just basic coding, when I was in secondary school. Really, that's stuff that needs to be taught in primary school. Right now, again, so we have to start looking at how we determine, so let me say that differently. How do we want to position people, the learners that is, to be effective? We need to rethink what would it take to now get them ready for a future that is changing, because the careers have changed, a lot of the world has changed. The skills that you need for tomorrow are not some of the skills that you would have needed 5 years ago. All right, so in a nutshell, there's curriculum, there's technology, there's access. We have to rethink a lot of those pieces.
Right. So it's interesting. We are coming to the bottom of the hour. It's almost 1:30. I do have two questions that I want to try to slide in. The first one to Rachel, and this is triggered by the comment by I believe it's Miss Arifa Ghani. She made the comment, it's a one-man job and it's a lot of effort, but we notice a lot of emphasis being placed on women in IT. So I want to ask you directly, how challenging is it for women to get into IT, that field, and how easy is it for them to leverage competencies versus the glass ceiling, if you will, that seems to limit their progress? What has been your experience in that regard?
There's nothing stopping a woman from going into IT. There were lots of females in my class in UE, and but I have noticed that as you tend to get further into the technology group, it is really male dominated. But in the organization that I've worked at, thankfully, I've never been treated differently in terms of my gender. So I did progress quite a lot in terms of my technology field, and I pretty much can hold my own right now with the guys. So I would love to encourage more girls to get into the field of IT because it's basically critical thinking. And I would say it's a good skill.
It sounds like the cost that you all get in the profession is democratic, yeah, and equal across the board. Final thoughts as we bring this session to a close. I want to throw out a question to for each of you to respond, and it's in the context of here we are today with everything the way it is. If we were to, as a business decision maker or leader, if we were to wish to steer our culture towards a greater uptake of technology or greater buy-in by the staff, what advice would you give to the CEO? Be it a big enterprise, a government ministry, a SME firm, what advice you would give to them in order to lead that movement towards tech? Abdullah, you want to start?
Yeah, I should have slept on that one before. That's a deep question. But I think the answer is simple, and it's what technology, what do you want to, what is your strategy, and how do you plan to get to that point B that you want to get to, and then what technologies you can use to harness to take you there. And as everyone has said up to this point, it really is about the business. It really has to be about the business. The technology spend is a lot. It's a big part of your budget. And the promises need to be managed. The projects need to be managed. But at the end of the day, it is about getting from point A to point B. It is about beating out the competition and thriving. And technology is, at the end of the day, the tool. It's part of your strategy, but it's a tool to get you there.
Excellent, appreciated. Rachel, same question to you.
I will tell that CEO, take a look around, look at what people are doing, look at what's going on in the world. Do you want to really stay relevant, or do you want to stay as you are? Do you want something to come in again that will just totally shut you down? You've been disrupted, but what do you want to be when you grow up?
And Lorenzo, final comments from you on this?
Yeah, I think CEOs really have to remember the purpose for the organization. Why do we exist? Which is, there are people that we're here to serve. And secondly, you have to be thinking in the future. You have to always have your feet on the ground in today, but your mind in the future, and having a sense of where do we need to take the people, which is the team that works with you, where do we need to take them in order to deliver in a relevant way to the people that you committed to, which is the customers that you set up to serve in the first place. And then you need to describe what that future looks like. You have to describe it in a very clear way. A vision, as simple as it is, a vision allows people to be propelled into the future. It gives you a perspective of a future that is hopeful, a future that is better, a future that is more enhanced. If everyone could rally around that, in other words, if the vision is clear, rich, and exciting enough, you will find people will say, yeah, I want to work with you.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you all for those. We have a lot more questions that came up, so I want to apologize to the panelists because we certainly would have loved to carry on this conversation and air all the questions and concerns. Or communication around that. I want to thank all the attendants and participants for taking the time to engage in this process and for all your brilliant questions. Thank you so much. To the panelists, thank you as well for taking the time to share of your expertise and your experiences around this area. And we do fervently hope that it would add value to the businesses, the organizations within the region who wish to use this situation that we're in today to redefine a new role and a new level of performance moving forward. So thank you all for attending, and we look forward to welcoming you again at subsequent episodes in this Business Roundtable. Have a good one.